Hello, my name is Martina and I am with Economist Impact's Policy and Insights team. And I'm joined this afternoon at Sustainability Week by Heather Buchanan, CEO of Bankers for Net Zero. So Heather, what is the sustainability innovation that you are currently most excited about?
Innovation. So I would actually potentially say that one of the things I'm most excited about right now isn't necessarily innovation, but getting back to basics, which is in terms of really finding out, getting some really granular data in understanding what impact is. Because up to now, we've taken a very kind of top-down approach to how as kind of ESG is reported and how emissions are reported, particularly in Scope 3. And so we're working on a project right now, Project Perseus, where we're looking to automate GHG kind of emissions reporting for all SMEs in the country. Like I say, it just came out in the Green Finance Strategy this morning as one of the kind of core pieces of work that we're doing with the government. But doing that will allow much more accurate data to flow upstream in order to start making some really kind of investment grade decisions based on assurable data. And so it's something new on the one hand, but it's actually at its core just getting back to basics of what, there's so much noise in this area and there's so much information flying about. And so we're very much focusing on how do we get one thing done well, which is getting kind of your carbon intensity of your electricity supply and doing it on an automated basis.
And if you had $100 billion, what would you spend it on to advance our global progress and why?
I would spend on making sure that we have the right infrastructure in place so that on a global level we're all speaking the same language. So, and that's what really allows finance to flow and private finance to flow, because 100 billion is obviously a great amount of money, but it's not enough for everything we need. So we're still working on the infrastructure piece in terms of how we actually speak to each other about sustainability, how we measure it, how we can anticipate what future values are, all that. If we get the infrastructure and we get the wiring right, that can give us the opportunity to really get private finance flowing throughout the world. And that's kind of our core element.
No, that makes sense. And looking ahead to COP28, what are some of the key outcomes you would like to see come out of COP28?
I think, as with everybody right now, it's making sure that we're really kind of pushing forward our progress and we're not slipping back. I mean, I think, at a very basic level, there's a bit of an existential crisis going on right now about whether or not we can keep 1.5 alive. So that has to always be at the forefront. I am hoping that, certainly in the private sector, finance, there is a kind of double down on the commitments to really kind of pushing through investment into the technologies we need and really bringing to the fore the discussions around nature and climate and actually how we value nature.
And how can the recent momentum on global action on biodiversity be sustained? I know that that's maybe not necessarily...
Absolutely. I think a lot of it's just around the education piece and places, like the press and the Economist talking about it a lot. And it's one of these things we have used biodiversity and nature as a resource for years and years and years that we've assumed we've got an unlimited supply of, and we don't. And we haven't really valued that properly. And so the more that we can bring that to the fore and make people understand that there's an investable value there as well, the better it would be. But yeah, lots of noise. We're repeating ourselves incessantly.
Cool. So I want to now ask you a few questions that are a bit more relevant to what it is that you do.
Yep.
So maybe just to kick us off, what do you think are the immediate areas for action that private sector investors you think have to focus on?
Getting so that it's transition plans, and everybody's been working very hard at getting their transition plans in place. Certainly, the majority of the members we work with are retail banks. So, in reality, with the commitments people have made or financial institutions have made, they're all of a sudden responsible for every single mortgage they've written, every overdraft, every small business loan, and actually understanding what the impact of each of those is and getting that data in the right way. And that's obviously Project Perseus that I mentioned earlier, is about getting that information in. So until we get to a point where we can understand and institutions can speak to their customers in a way that both understand, we're going to have a fundamental mismatch. And it's that cumulative challenge of, it's literally tens of millions of conversations that need to happen in some format, whether that be digital or whatnot, in order to drive it forward. So I think that's kind of it's what this really looks like when it hits the real economy. It is a critical point. Up to now, we've been dealing with the bigger numbers, the reporting frameworks, and all the rest of it. But at some point, that it gets implemented in the real world and it affects real people.
And I guess that actually segues quite nicely into my next question, which is, what do you think are the key challenges still associated with actually mobilizing private sector investments for net zero, for the climate, for biodiversity?
So absolutely, again, broken record, the data piece, having that assurable data in particular is really important. And I just mentioned my panel earlier, but if you think about it, our current accounting systems, that really started in the 16th century, actually late 15th century in Italy. So we've had a good 500-600 years to get to the point where we all understand our P&Ls and our balance sheets and thing. And now, in a matter of a couple of decades, we're having to bring in a whole different load of data points, and at this point we don't even agree what those points are and what the format is. So it's until we can bring ourselves back to having that framework, really understanding, being able to look forward, having clear policy signals that underpin that, there's just not enough kind of security and to really kind of move forward with investment that we need.
And I know that earlier you mentioned more of that real economy, and you alluded to some of the standards that exist. Earlier last year in 2022, we actually interviewed Emmanuel Faber, which is the chair of the ISSB.
Yep.
And so I kind of want to ask you a little bit more on these sustainability standards. So how do you think sustainability standards have evolved in recent years? And how do you think these might support actual efforts to mobilize private sector investments for the climate?
No, I mean, absolutely. This whole area is moving at pace. I think one of the difficulties we have is it is all on a voluntary basis for the most part. So, it's really up to governments to start to kind of pick a horse, as it were, in terms of how things go. If you think of SMEs, though, there's no standardized reporting framework for SMEs. And so you've got a situation now where an SME, if you're kind of a mid-sized, say, food producer, or you'll be asked for different sets of information. If you supply 4 different supermarkets and have 2 bank accounts, you're potentially being asked for 6 different sets of information in a different format. And so whilst we were kind of getting our high level, it's there when we're still using estimates down the supply chain, we're really not grappling with the heart of the issue. And so it's fantastic that everybody's working together, getting those standards together. We are going to need to get to a point where we have some minimum standards that need to be put in as a baseline and probably regulated for.
Great, and that sort of segues into my final question quite perfectly, which is, how can policymakers actually create a more favorable environment for investments, for standards, for climate action?
It's all about long-term clarity. It really, really is. And some joined-up thinking. I mean, you can still have, right now, certainly in the UK, we're looking at financial institutions having to hold more capital against loans to SMEs. And so on the one hand, you've got prudential regulators looking at financial stability and holding enough capital. Then on the other hand, you've got different areas of government saying, well, actually, we need to lend more to small businesses in order to help them decarbonize. So there's some areas where there are conflicting signals that are coming out. So we need to kind of smooth those things over. But it's the long term. I mean, the recent kind of real focus on EVs has absolutely changed the market. It was a really simple, clear message that everybody can work towards, and I think that's what everybody needs.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you so much.